I never thought my own son would look at me like I was a stranger. But there he stood, in the doorway of the home I had built with my own 2 hands, his eyes cold and unfamiliar. "This villa belongs to my wife's family now, Dad. You're banned." Those words hung in the desert air between us, sharp as cactus spines. Behind him, through the open door, I could see my daughter-in-law Samantha and her parents, Charles and Linda Davenport, sipping wine in my living room. My living room. The one where I'd held my wife as she took her last breath. The one I'd built stone by stone over 2 decades of hard labor. I stood there with my suitcase in hand, the Sedona sunset burning the sky behind me, painting the red rock cliffs in brilliant orange and crimson. This moment felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold. Just yesterday, I'd left for a quick trip to Phoenix, telling Ryan I'd be back today. I never imagined returning to this. "Ryan," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this is my home." He smirked, a confident tilt to his head that reminded me painfully of his mother. Except Angela had never looked at me with such contempt. "Not anymore. Samantha's family invested in this property. We've restructured ownership while you were gone." He gestured vaguely toward the Davenports. "It's better this way. You're getting older, Dad. You don't need all this space." I watched Charles Davenport raise his glass in my direction, a smug smile spreading across his face. Linda was already rearranging my furniture, pushing Angela's favorite reading chair into a corner. I could have shouted, could have pushed past Ryan and demanded they leave, but something deep inside me, perhaps wisdom, perhaps shock, kept me rooted to the spot. Instead, I did the one thing they didn't expect. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who knew something they didn't, because in my pocket was the key to a truth they had overlooked, a hidden clause in Angela's will that we had, created together before cancer took her from us 5 years ago. "I understand," I said, my voice remarkably calm. "I'll get a hotel tonight." Ryan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He had expected a fight, but I simply turned and walked back to my truck, placing my suitcase in the bed with deliberate care. As I drove away, I watched my son in the rearview mirror, standing in the driveway with a puzzled expression that gradually morphed into satisfaction. Let him think he'd won. For now. That night, in a modest hotel room overlooking the highway, I called Anthony Vega. We'd been friends since high school, and he'd been our family lawyer for 30 years. Angela had insisted we include him in our estate planning, especially after Ryan married Samantha. "They've done what?" Anthony's voice rose through the phone speaker. "They claim the Davenports have invested in the property, that it belongs to them now." I stared at the ceiling, counting the water stains. "That's impossible, Daniel. The villa is locked in the trust. There's no way they could have transferred ownership without your signature." "They might have forged something," I said. "Ryan knows my handwriting well enough." Anthony was quiet for a moment. "Remember the clause Angela insisted on? The one we call the sanctuary clause," I finished. "I remember." Angela had always been wiser than me. More perceptive, too. She'd noticed the change in Ryan after he met Samantha, how he'd become more distant, more interested in status and appearances. While I'd made excuses for my son, Angela had prepared for this very scenario. "Let them think they've won," Anthony advised. "Give me 2 weeks to prepare everything. Don't confront them, don't argue. Let them believe you've surrendered. And then we show them what Angela meant when she said your home would always be your refuge." I hung up and went to the window. From here, I could just make out the distant silhouette of the red rocks, darkened now, against the night sky. Somewhere beyond them stood the home I'd built for my family, a refuge that had become a battlefield. My mind drifted back to 25 years ago. I was a young contractor then, with big dreams and calloused hands. Angela was a kindergarten teacher with a gentle smile and fierce determination. We bought that barren plot of land when no one else wanted it. Too rocky, too far from town. But Angela had stood there, the wind blowing her hair, and said, "This is where we'll build our life, Daniel." We couldn't afford architects or fancy builders, so I designed it myself, drawing plans at our kitchen table late at night. I laid the foundation with friends over weekends, mixed concrete until my shoulders burned, placed each stone of the exterior walls with my own hands. Ryan used to help as a boy. I taught him how to level a stone, how to mix mortar to the right consistency, his small hands eager beside mine. When did those hands become clenched fists? When did my boy turn into the stranger who could throw his father out of his own home? I closed the hotel curtains and sat on the edge of the bed. In 2 weeks, they would learn the truth. In the meantime, I would Do exactly what Anthony suggested. Nothing. Nothing. Except remember who I was. Because while Ryan might have forgotten his father's character, I had not forgotten mine. I was Daniel Mercer, a man who had built his home from the ground up, who had loved his wife through health and sickness, who had raised his son with every ounce of love he possessed. And I was still that man, even without my walls around me. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I rented a small apartment in West Sedona, a simple one-bedroom with a view of nothing but the parking lot. Each morning, I'd wake with the sun, my body still attuned to the rhythm of life in the villa, where dawn would paint my bedroom in gold and crimson. Here, the light was different, harsher, less forgiving. I avoided my usual spots. Around town, the hardware store where I'd spent countless Saturday mornings, the diner where Angela and I had shared breakfast every Sunday for 20 years. Sedona wasn't a big place. Running into Ryan or the Davenports was a risk I couldn't take. Not yet. On the 4th day, my phone rang. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. Dad? His voice was carefully casual. Just checking in. Wanted to make, Sure you're doing okay? I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. I'm fine, son. Good, good. Listen, we're going through some of the stuff in the storage room. There are boxes of Mom's old things. Do you want them, or should we donate them? My knuckles turned white around the phone. Angela's things. Her journals, her collection of handmade ceramic bowls, the quilt her grandmother had made. To Ryan, they were just stuff. I'll take them, I said, working to keep my voice steady. All of them. Okay, sure, it's just taking up space anyway. When can you pick them up? Taking up space. As if his mother's memory was an inconvenience. I'll let you know, I said, and ended the call before I said something I'd regret. I walked to the window of my rented apartment and stared out at the parking lot. Somewhere in this town, my son was living in my house, sleeping in rooms I had built, surrounded by memories he didn't value. The next day, Anthony called. Everything's in place, he said. They filed paperwork claiming a stake in the property through a private investment agreement. It's completely invalid, of course, since the villa is held in the trust with the sanctuary clause. But it shows intent. What does that mean for us? It means they've given us exactly what we need. They're planning something big. My sources tell me they've scheduled movers for the 15th. That's next Friday. They're bringing in furniture, artwork. Looks like the Davenports are making a permanent move. I closed my eyes, picturing strangers' furniture replacing our worn, comfortable pieces. Charles Davenport's pretentious oil paintings covering the walls where Angela's watercolors had hung. What do we do? I asked. We let them move in, Anthony said with a hint of satisfaction in his voice. And then we evict them, legally and completely. He explained the plan. The sanctuary clause that Angela had insisted on including in our will was designed specifically to prevent the villa from ever being taken from me. It stated unequivocally that I retained irrevocable lifetime residency rights, and that any attempt to coerce or claim the property would trigger an automatic legal eviction process. They never read the fine print, Anthony said. They were too busy planning how to take what isn't theirs. On the morning of the 15th, I woke before sunrise. I dressed. Carefully. Angela's favorite blue shirt, the watch she'd given me for our 25th anniversary. I wasn't dressing for the Davenports or even for Ryan. I was dressing for her. Anthony picked me up at 9 a.m. He looked sharp in his charcoal suit, a thick folder of legal documents tucked under his arm. Ready? He asked as I climbed into his car. As I'll ever be. We drove in silence through the winding roads of Sedona, the red rock formations standing like sentinels against the clear blue sky. When we turned onto the long driveway leading to the villa, I saw them. 3 moving trucks parked out front, men in uniforms carrying boxes and furniture toward the house. And there was Ryan, clipboard in hand, directing the chaos. Samantha stood beside him, her dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, designer sunglasses perched on her nose. The Davenports hovered nearby, Linda pointing imperiously at various items, Charles nodding in satisfaction. They didn't notice our car at first. We parked behind the last moving truck and sat for a moment, watching. You don't have to do this, Daniel, Anthony said quietly. I can handle it alone. I shook my head. No, this is my home. I need to be here. We stepped out into the bright morning sun. It took almost a full minute before Ryan spotted us, his face freezing in mid-sentence as he was instructing a mover. He said something to Samantha, who turned sharply in our direction. I straightened my shoulders and walked forward, Anthony beside me. 25 years of memories surrounded me with each step. The flagstone path I had laid by hand, the olive tree I had planted when Ryan was born, the wind chimes Angela had hung that still sang in the gentle breeze. "Dad," Ryan said, his voice a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "What are you doing here?" "I've come home, son," I replied simply. "You can't just show up like this," Ryan hissed, stepping toward me with his clipboard clutched to his chest like a shield. "We're in the middle of moving in." I noticed he said we're not there, as if he too was just arriving, rather than having lived in this home his entire childhood, having learned to ride a bike in this driveway, having graduated high school in the backyard beneath strung lights I'd hung myself. "Actually," Anthony said, stepping forward with professional calm, "Mr. Mercer has every right to be here. This is, after all, his home." Charles Davenport approached, his hand extended toward Anthony as if to physically block him. "I don't know who you are, but we have legal ownership papers. This property has been transferred to our family investment trust." Anthony smiled, the kind of smile that had won him countless courtroom victories. "I'm Anthony Vega, Mr. Mercer's attorney, and I'm afraid those papers you're referring to are completely invalid." Linda Davenport joined her husband, her face pinched with irritation. Ryan assured us everything was properly handled. All eyes turned to my son, who looked suddenly much younger and far less certain. "It was," he insisted. "Dad signed the transfer agreement. I witnessed it." "No," I said quietly. "I didn't." The silence that followed was heavy with accusation. Samantha moved to Ryan's side, her hand squeezing his arm in warning. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion inside," Anthony suggested. The Davenports exchanged glances, clearly reluctant to treat us as anything other than unwanted visitors. But Anthony's confident demeanor and the legal folder he carried persuaded them. "Fine," Charles said stiffly, "but the movers will continue their work." "Actually," Anthony replied, "I'd advise pausing the moving process until our business is concluded." We entered my home, my sanctuary, now cluttered with half-unpacked boxes and unfamiliar furniture. Angela's reading chair had been replaced by a sleek leather monstrosity. The hand-woven rug we'd bought in Santa Fe on our 20th anniversary was gone, replaced by something sterile and beige. My throat tightened at the sight of strangers' possessions invading the space Angela and I had created together. But I kept my expression neutral as we gathered in the living room. Ryan and the Davenports sat together on the new sofa, a united front. Anthony and I took the two chairs opposite them. "I'll be direct," Anthony began, opening his folder. "Any transfer agreement regarding this? Property is null and void. The villa is held in an irrevocable trust with specific conditions that make it impossible to transfer ownership without Mr. Mercer's explicit consent." "Which he gave," Ryan interrupted. "I did not," I said, looking directly at my son. "And you know that, Ryan." Charles Davenport's face reddened. "Are you suggesting my son-in-law forged your signature?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Anthony continued as if there had been no interruption. "Furthermore, there is a specific clause in the trust, what we call the sanctuary clause, that provides Mr. Mercer with lifetime residency rights. Any attempt to coerce or claim the property triggers an automatic legal eviction process." He removed a document from his folder and placed it on the coffee table between us. It was Angela's will, with the sanctuary clause highlighted in bright yellow. "Mrs. Mercer was quite specific in her wishes," Anthony explained. "She wanted to ensure that this home, built by her husband's hands, would always remain his refuge." The room fell silent as Ryan leaned forward to read the highlighted text. I watched his face as understanding dawned, followed quickly by disbelief. "This can't be legally binding," Samantha said, her voice sharp. "We've already invested considerable funds in this property." "Any investments were made based on fraudulent premises," Anthony replied. "And I'm afraid the clause is indeed legally binding. In fact, by attempting to claim ownership through false documentation, you've triggered the eviction protocol outlined in the will." He produced another document, this one newly printed, with the county seal clearly visible at the top. "This is an eviction notice effective immediately. You have 24 hours to remove all personal belongings and vacate the premises." The shock on their faces was exactly what Anthony had predicted. Charles Davenport sputtered incoherently. Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Samantha's composure cracked, her designer sunglasses slipping down her nose as she turned to Ryan in accusation. But it was my son's face I couldn't look away from. The boy I had raised, the young man I had put through college, had sacrificed for, had loved unconditionally. He looked at me now not with remorse or shame, but with fury, as if I had betrayed him rather than the other way around. "You planned this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You let us think we'd won, just so you could humiliate us." "No, Ryan," I replied, my heart heavy. "I just came home." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity and tension. Anthony stayed to oversee the removal process, ensuring that none of my possessions were taken in the confusion. The movers, confused by the sudden reversal, worked double time to reload the trucks they had just unloaded. I couldn't bear to watch. Instead, I walked through my home, reacquainting myself with the spaces that had been briefly invaded. In the master bedroom, I found Angela's nightstand empty. Her reading glasses, her favorite novel, the small ceramic dish where she kept her wedding ring at night, all gone. "Where are my wife's things?" I asked, returning to the living room where Anthony was directing traffic. Ryan looked up from a box he was hastily packing. "In storage. I told you that. I want them back. Today." For a moment, father and son stared at each other across a gulf that seemed unbridgeable. Then Ryan nodded curtly. "I'll have them delivered." By sunset, the moving trucks were gone, taking with them the Davenport's furniture and my son's betrayal. Charles and Linda departed in their luxury SUV, neither of them looking back at the house or at me. Samantha followed in her own car, her face a mask of barely contained rage. Ryan was the last to leave. He stood in the driveway, keys in hand, looking up at the villa silhouetted against the darkening sky. "I did what I thought was best," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You're getting older. This place is too much for you to maintain alone." "Is that what you tell yourself?" I asked quietly. "That you were thinking of me when you tried to steal my home?" "I wasn't stealing it," he insisted. "I was securing our family's future." "Our family," I repeated. "Ryan, this home was built for our family, for you to grow up in, for your children to visit someday. It was never meant to be a trophy for the Davenports." He shook his head, as if my words were meaningless noise. "You've always been stubborn, Dad. Mom would have understood." The mention of Angela, his use of her memory to justify his actions, was almost more than I could bear. But I held my ground, my voice steady. "Your mother understood more than you know. That's why she protected this place from exactly what you tried to do." Ryan's face hardened. "Enjoy your empty house, Dad. I hope it keeps you warm at night." He climbed into his car and drove away, the taillights receding down the long driveway until they disappeared around the bend. I stood alone in the gathering darkness, victory and loss tangled so tightly within me that I couldn't separate one from the other. Anthony appeared beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "He'll come around eventually," Anthony said, "once the Davenport's influence wears off." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The son I'd raised seemed lost to me now, replaced by a stranger with familiar features. "Thank you," I said to my old friend, "for everything." Anthony squeezed my shoulder. "Angela would be proud of you, Daniel. You protected what you built together." After he left, I walked slowly through my reclaimed home. In the quiet stillness, I could almost hear echoes of the past. Angela's laughter, Ryan's childhood footsteps racing down the hallway, family dinners and holiday celebrations. But tonight, those echoes only emphasized the emptiness. I had won back my home, but at what cost? The first week, after the eviction, the silence in the villa was deafening. Each morning, I woke to a house devoid of the chaos the Davenports had briefly brought, but also empty of the family I had once known. My victory felt hollow, my sanctuary a reminder of all I had lost. Ryan's words echoed in my head. "Enjoy your empty house, Dad. I hope it keeps you warm at night." Was he right? Had I clung to stones and mortar at the expense of my relationship with my only child? On the third day, a delivery truck arrived with boxes of Angela's things. I spent hours unpacking them, my hands trembling as I rediscovered pieces of my wife's life. Her journals, filled with her neat handwriting, her collection of watercolors, some framed, others carefully stored between sheets of acid-free paper. The quilt her grandmother had made, still smelling faintly of the lavender sachets Angela had placed among her linens. Each item was a memory, a piece of the woman who had been my partner for 30 years. I placed her reading glasses back on her nightstand, her favorite novel beside them. The ceramic dish returned to its spot, though the wedding ring it once held now rested on a chain around my neck. That night, I sat on the terrace with a glass of bourbon, watching the sunset behind the red rocks. Angela and I had spent countless evenings here, planning our futures, discussing Ryan's progress in school, simply being together in comfortable silence. Now there was only my own company and the whisper of the wind. My phone remained silent. No calls from Ryan, no text messages asking how I was doing. It was as if the eviction had severed our connection completely. The following week, I forced myself back into the routines of my life before the Davenports' attempted takeover. I returned to my volunteer work at the community center, teaching basic construction skills to at-risk teens. I resumed my morning hikes along the Red Rock trails, my body gradually remembering the rhythm and joy of movement. At the hardware store, old friends greeted me with warm handshakes and concerned questions. "Haven't seen you around much, Daniel," said Mike, who'd owned the place for as long as I'd lived in Sedona. "Everything okay?" I gave vague answers about being busy with house projects, unwilling to share the painful truth of my son's betrayal. But word travels fast in small towns. By my third visit, the questions had stopped, replaced by sympathetic nods and extra discounts on my purchases. At the diner, Maria brought my usual breakfast without me having to order, squeezing my shoulder gently as she set the plate before me. "On the house today, Mr. Mercer," she said, her kind eyes telling me she knew something of my situation. "It's good to have you back." The community's quiet support was a balm to my wounded spirit, a reminder that family could be found in unexpected places. 1 month after the eviction, Anthony invited me to dinner at his home. His wife, Teresa, embraced me at the door, her familiar scent of cinnamon and vanilla bringing an unexpected lump to my throat. "It's been too long, Daniel," she said, leading me into their warm kitchen. "We've missed you." Over homemade lasagna and red wine, we carefully avoided discussing Ryan and the Davenports. Instead, we reminisced about high school adventures, about the early days when Anthony was just starting his law practice, and I was building my first houses. Teresa shared stories of her kindergarten class, the same age group Angela had taught for so many years. For a few hours, I felt normal again, connected, part of something beyond my solitary existence. As we lingered over coffee and Teresa's famous tiramisu, Anthony finally broached the subject we'd been dancing around. "Have you heard from Ryan?" he asked gently. I shook my head. Not a word. Teresa covered my hand with hers. "He'll come around, Daniel. He's hurt and embarrassed right now, but he's still your son." "I'm not so sure," I admitted. "You didn't see his face that day. He looked at me like I was the enemy." "The Davenports have a strong influence on him," Anthony said. "Always have, since he married Samantha. But blood runs deeper than social connections." I wanted to believe him, but the memory of Ryan's cold eyes made it difficult. How had we reached this point? When had money and status become more important to my son than family and integrity? After dinner, as I prepared to leave, Teresa pressed a container of leftover lasagna into my hands. "Come back next week," she insisted. "We're having a small gathering. Nothing fancy, just friends. It would do you good to socialize a bit." I agreed, though the thought of small talk and curious glances made my stomach clench. But Teresa was right. I couldn't continue living like a hermit, hiding in my reclaimed sanctuary. The following morning, I decided to finally tackle the garden. Angela had been the one with the green thumb, carefully tending the desert-adapted plants that surrounded our home. Since her death, I'd maintained the basics: watering, occasional pruning, but the garden had gradually lost its vibrant, intentional character. I spent hours weeding, trimming, replanting areas that had become sparse. The physical labor was therapeutic, the connection to the earth grounding. As my hands worked the soil, my mind quieted for the first time in weeks. When the doorbell rang mid-afternoon, I was covered in dirt and sweat, my knees stiff from kneeling. I wasn't expecting visitors, and for a brief, hopeful moment, I thought it might be Ryan. Instead, I opened the door to find Linda Davenport standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable and out of place. "Mrs. Davenport," I said, unable to hide my surprise. "What can I do for you?" She clutched her designer handbag like a lifeline, her eyes darting past me to scan the interior of the house. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. She perched on the edge of the sofa, refusing my offer of tea or water. "I'll be direct, Mr. Mercer," she said. "My husband doesn't know I'm here, and I'd prefer to keep it that way." I sat across from her, waiting. Whatever had brought Linda Davenport to my door after the humiliation of the eviction, it had to be significant. "It's about Ryan and Samantha," she continued. "They're having difficulties, Financial difficulties, primarily. The investments they made, the money they put into this property, it wasn't exactly theirs to invest. I frowned, not understanding. What do you mean? Linda sighed, her perfectly manicured hands twisting in her lap. Charles and I provided the funds. It was meant to be a loan, with this villa as collateral. Now that the eviction has occurred, Charles is demanding repayment. The implications slowly dawned on me. Ryan and Samantha can't repay the loan. No, Linda confirmed. And Charles is not a forgiving creditor, even when it comes to family. I leaned back, processing this new information. Ryan hadn't just betrayed me. He had gambled with money that wasn't his, risked his marriage and financial stability on a scheme built on deception. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Linda met my eyes directly for the first time. Because despite everything, Mr. Mercer, I believe you care about your son. And right now he needs someone who cares more than he needs pride or revenge. Linda Davenport's revelation left me reeling long after she departed. I stood in my garden, hands still caked with dirt, mind racing with implications. My son wasn't just a betrayer. He was drowning, caught in a web partially of his own making. I called Anthony that evening, pacing the length of my kitchen as I recounted Linda's visit. Does that change anything legally? I asked. The fact that the money came from Charles? Not for your situation, Anthony replied after a thoughtful pause. The villa remains yours, protected by the trust. But for Ryan and Samantha, if Charles decides to pursue legal action over the loan, they could be in serious trouble. What kind of trouble? Depends on the loan terms. Best case, they face significant debt. Worst case, if there was any fraud involved in obtaining the loan. He trailed off, but the implication was clear. I need to talk to him, I said. Are you sure that's wise? Ryan might see it as gloating or interference. He's my son, Anthony. Whatever he's done, he's still my son. The next morning, I drove to Ryan and Samantha's house on the other side of Sedona, a modern glass and steel structure perched on a hillside, with views that justified its undoubtedly hefty price tag. I'd only been there twice since they'd purchased it 3 years ago. Both visits had been stiff formal affairs where I felt more like an appraised object than a father. I parked in their circular driveway, noting the absence of Samantha's luxury SUV. Only Ryan's car sat in the open garage. Perhaps it was better this way. A conversation between father and son without the Davenport influence. I rang the doorbell, my heart hammering against my ribs. When Ryan opened the door, the shock on his face quickly hardened into wariness. Dad, this is unexpected. He looked tired, I realized. The confident sheen I'd seen during the eviction had dulled, replaced by dark circles under his eyes and a slight slump to his shoulders. Can I come in? I asked. He hesitated, then stepped back without a word. I followed him into a living room dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that looked more sculptural than functional. No family photos adorned the walls, no evidence of the childhood memories I treasured. Samantha's not here, Ryan said, as if warning me. I came to see you, not Samantha. He gestured toward a sleek white sofa that looked like it had never been sat on. I perched on the edge, feeling out of place in my worn jeans and work shirt. I know about the loan, I said, deciding directness was the only approach. From Charles. Ryan's face drained of color. He remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. Linda told you. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. Why are you here? He asked, his voice tight. To gloat? To tell me I got what I deserved? The bitterness in his tone cut deep. Is that really what he thought of me? That I would take pleasure in his troubles? I'm here because you're my son, and you're in trouble. He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Now you care? After humiliating us in front of Samantha's parents? After ruining everything? I didn't ruin anything, Ryan. I protected what was mine. What your mother wanted me to protect. Don't bring Mom into this, he snapped. She would have understood what we were trying to do. I took a deep breath, fighting to maintain my composure. What exactly were you trying to do, son? Take my home? The home I built with my own hands for our family? It wasn't about taking your home. Ryan paced the length of the window, agitation evident in every movement. It was about securing our future. The villa is worth millions now, with the Sedona real estate market. It's just sitting there with only you rattling around in it. We could have turned it into a luxury vacation rental, generated real income. So this was a business decision? I asked, incredulous. Throwing your father out of his home was just good financial sense? He stopped pacing, turning to face me. You don't understand. Charles offered to back us, to help us establish a real estate portfolio. The villa was just the first property. We had plans for 3 more acquisitions this year. It was going to change everything for us. And now? Ryan's shoulders slumped. Now it's all gone to hell. Charles is calling in the loan, all of it. $250,000. We don't have it. The money was tied up in the villa renovations and the deposits on the other properties. The amount staggered me. $250,000 gambled on a scheme built on deception. What will you do? He sank into a chair opposite me, suddenly looking very young and very scared. I don't know. Samantha's trying to convince her father to extend the terms, but he trailed off. Not a forgiving creditor, I finished, echoing Linda's words. Ryan looked at me sharply. Her exact phrase? I nodded. She's right. He ran a hand through his hair. He's threatening to sue us for fraud if we don't pay by the end of the month. Says we misrepresented the villa's ownership status to secure the loan. Did you? A flicker of shame crossed his face before being replaced by defiance. I did what I had to do. For my family's future. The irony wasn't lost on me. How Ryan could justify betraying his father in the name of family, while redefining family to exclude me entirely. I can help, I said quietly. Ryan's head snapped up. What? I said I can help. Not with all of it, but I have savings. Enough to give you some breathing room while you figure out the rest. Disbelief warred with hope on my son's face. Why would you do that? After what happened? Because that's what fathers do, Ryan. We help our children, even when they hurt us. Even when they forget who we are. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of the boy I'd raised. Vulnerable, uncertain, in need of guidance. But it vanished quickly, replaced by calculation. How much? He asked. The question disappointed me, though it shouldn't have. I'd hoped for gratitude, perhaps even remorse. Instead, Ryan was already measuring the value of my offer against his need. I can give you $75,000, I said. It's most of what I have. The rest is tied up in the trust with the villa. He nodded slowly, mental calculations playing out behind his eyes. That would help. It might be enough to convince Charles to restructure the rest of the debt. I'll need a few days to arrange the transfer, I said, rising to leave. And Ryan, this is a gift, not a loan. But it comes with one condition. Wariness returned to his expression. What condition? That you come to dinner at the villa on Sunday. Just you. Not Samantha, not the Davenports. You and me, talking honestly like we used to. He hesitated, clearly weighing his financial desperation against his pride. Finally, he nodded. Sunday. What time? 6 o'clock. I'll make your mother's lasagna. A flicker of emotion crossed his face at the mention of Angela's signature dish. For years after she died, I'd made it on the anniversary of her passing, a tradition Ryan and I had shared until his marriage to Samantha had created the first fractures in our relationship. I'll be there, he said. As I drove home, hope and apprehension battled within me. I was extending an olive branch, offering financial salvation and the possibility of reconciliation. But Ryan's focus on the money rather than the relationship left me uncertain whether this was a path to healing or just another transaction. Still, I would try. For Angela's sake, for the memory of the family we'd built together, I would try. Sunday arrived with a clarity typical of early autumn in Sedona, the sky an impossible blue, the air crisp and scented with juniper. I spent the morning gathering ingredients for Angela's lasagna, following her handwritten recipe card to the letter. Each step was a meditation, a connection to the woman who had known our son's heart better than anyone. By late afternoon, the villa was filled with the rich aroma of tomato sauce and herbs, a scent that belonged to happier times. I set the dining table with care, Angela's hand-painted plates, the wine glasses we'd received as a wedding gift, a small vase holding a single desert wildflower in the center. At 10 minutes to 6, I heard tires on the gravel driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched Ryan park and sit in his car for several long moments before finally stepping out. He'd dressed formally, pressed slacks, a button-down shirt, polished shoes, as if coming to a business meeting rather than a family dinner. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to meet him at the door. You came, I said, unable to hide the relief in my voice. I said I would. His tone was neutral, his expression guarded. But he'd come. That was what mattered. I led him inside, noting how his eyes darted around the living room, taking in the changes I'd made since the eviction. Angela's reading chair had been returned to its place by the window. Her watercolors once again adorned the walls. The house had been reclaimed not just legally, but spiritually. "It looks like it used to," Ryan said quietly, "before Mom got sick." "That's what I was aiming for," I replied. "This was her home too." "Our home." A shadow passed over his face, but he said nothing more. We moved to the dining room, where I served the lasagna and poured 2 glasses of Chianti, Angela's favorite. The first few minutes were strained, our conversation limited to superficial observations about the weather and the food. But as the wine took effect and the familiar taste of his mother's recipe worked its magic, Ryan's rigid posture gradually relaxed. "This is exactly how she made it," he said, savoring a bite. "I've tried to recreate it for years, but it never comes out right." "That's because you always skip the anchovy paste," I replied with a small smile. "You think no one notices, but it changes everything." He looked surprised. "How did you know?" "Your mother told me. She said you'd make a face whenever—" "She added it, so she started doing it when you weren't looking." A genuine laugh escaped him, the first I'd heard in years. "She was sneaky like that." "She knew people," I agreed. "Knew what they needed even when they didn't know themselves." The conversation flowed more easily after that, our shared memories of Angela creating a bridge across the chasm between us. We reminisced about family, camping trips, about the summer Ryan broke his arm climbing the sycamore tree in the backyard, about Angela's infamous Christmas sweaters that she insisted we all wear for family photos. It wasn't until we moved to the living room with coffee that I broached the subject of the loan. "I've arranged the transfer," I said. "The money should be in your account by Tuesday." Ryan nodded, his expression sobering. "Thank you. I don't know what we would have done otherwise." "What will you do now, beyond repaying part of Charles's loan?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that it made my heart ache. "I don't know. Samantha's talking about moving to Phoenix, starting fresh. Her father has connections there." "Is that what you want?" Ryan, stared into his coffee cup as if it might contain answers. "I don't know what I want anymore. Everything was so clear a month ago. We had a plan. A future mapped out. A plan built on taking something that wasn't yours." I pointed out gently. He looked up, defensive. "It wasn't like that. Not in my mind. I thought you'd understand once it was done. That you'd see we were creating something bigger. Something that could benefit all of us. By throwing me out of my own home? By erasing your mother's presence from these walls? That wasn't the intent," he insisted. "We were going to offer you the guest house. You'd still be on the property, just not in the main house." The casual dismissal of my connection to the home I'd built stone by stone reignited the anger I'd been carefully suppressing all evening. "This isn't just a property, Ryan. This is the physical manifestation of 30 years of love and labor. Every wall, every floor, every window, I built them with these hands. I held them up, calloused and weathered. For you, for our family. I know that," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you saw dollar signs instead of memories, real estate value instead of family history." Ryan set his coffee cup down with a sharp clink. "Is that why you invited me here? To lecture me? To make sure I understand the depth of my betrayal before you hand over the money?" "No," I said firmly. "I invited you here because you're my son, and I love you, because I believe there's still a path back from this for us. But that path requires truth, and the truth is, what you tried to do was wrong." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the red rock formations now bathed in sunset light. "You don't understand what it's like," he said after a long silence. "Being Ryan Mercer, son of Daniel, the man who built half of Sedona with his bare hands, the perfect father who sacrificed everything for his family, the devoted husband who nursed his wife through cancer without complaint." The bitterness in his voice startled me. "Is that how you see me? It's how everyone sees you." He turned, eyes flashing. "Do you know what that's like? Growing up in the shadow of St. Daniel? Never measuring up? Never being enough? Ryan, no, let me finish. I've spent my entire adult life trying to create my own identity, my own success. When I met Samantha, when I saw how the Davenports lived, how they operated, it was like seeing a whole different world. A world where success wasn't measured in calluses and sweat, but in property portfolios and investment returns. I stood moving toward him slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "And that world seemed better to you?" It seemed easier, cleaner, more certain. His voice dropped. I thought I could bring those two worlds together. Use what the Davenports taught me to transform what you built into something more, without asking me, without honoring what this place means to me. He looked away. Yes, the simple admission hung between us, more honest than anything he'd said all evening. I'm sorry, he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. I never meant to hurt you. Those 3 words, I never meant, hung in the air between us, fragile as glass. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not just the man who had tried to take my home, but the boy who had once followed me around with a plastic hammer, mimicking my every move. Sit down, Ryan, I said, gesturing to the sofa. He hesitated, then returned to his seat, perched on the edge as if ready to flee. I want to show you something, I continued, moving to the bookshelf where I kept our family albums. I selected one bound in worn leather and brought it back to the coffee table. Do you remember this? Ryan glanced at the album without touching it. Mom's building book. She documented the construction of the villa. That's right. I opened it to the first page, where a much younger version of myself stood on an empty plot of land, arm around a pregnant Angela, both of us beaming at the camera. This was taken the day we closed on the property. You were 7 months along. I tapped Angela's rounded belly in the photo. Ryan's expression softened. She always said I was supervising the build from the womb. She was convinced you'd be an architect or engineer. The way you'd kick when we were out here, like you were excited about the project. I turned the pages slowly, showing Ryan photos he'd seen before but perhaps never truly understood. Me pouring the foundation with friends, Angela painting river stones that would become part of the entryway, both of us standing proudly beside the first completed wall. We built this place with love, Ryan, with hope for the future, our future as a family, your future. I continued through the album until I reached a page where a toddler, Ryan, maybe 3 years old, sat on my shoulders as I worked on the roof beams. You were my assistant from the moment you could walk, I said quietly. Don't you remember? He touched the photo gently, tracing the outline of his younger self. I remember you letting me hammer nails into scrap wood while you did the real work. I thought I was helping. You were. Having you there, seeing your excitement when something new took shape, it kept me going on days when my back was breaking and the money was tight. I turned to the final pages of the album, where photos documented the finishing touches, Angela planting the garden, me building the stone wall around the property, a 6-year-old Ryan helping to paint his bedroom. This house isn't just stone and mortar, son. It's our story. Your mother's and mine, yes, but yours too. It was always meant to be part of your inheritance, not as a financial asset, but as a legacy of love and labor. Ryan's eyes glistened in the soft lamplight. I forgot, he whispered. Somewhere. Along the way, I forgot what this place really means. The Davenports don't understand that, I said, without bitterness. They see property as investments, things to be bought and sold, leveraged for profit. There's nothing inherently wrong with that worldview, but it's not mine. And I hoped it wasn't yours either. Ryan closed the album, his hand lingering on its worn cover. Did everything get so complicated? When did money start mattering more than this? He gestured vaguely to the album, to the room around us, to the memories they contained. I don't know, I admitted, but I do know it's never too late to remember what's truly valuable. A heavy silence fell between us, filled with unspoken regrets and tentative hope. Finally, Ryan spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I've made a mess of everything. The loan, the villa, my marriage. Your marriage, I echoed, surprised. Is everything okay with Samantha? He laughed humorlessly. Not really. She blames me for the failed villa takeover. Says I should have known about the sanctuary clause. Should have been more thorough in my research. Her father agrees. And what do you think? Ryan ran a hand over his face. I think I've been trying to be someone I'm not for a very long time. Someone the Davenports would respect. Someone who sees the world the way they do. He looked up at me, his expression raw and honest. It's exhausting, Dad. The simple admission broke something open between us, a dam holding back years of misunderstanding and hurt. You never needed to be anyone other than who you are, Ryan. Not for me, not for your mother, not for anyone. I know that now, he said quietly, or I'm starting to remember it, at least. We talked deep into the night, really talked, in a way we hadn't since before Angela's illness. Ryan spoke about the pressure he felt to succeed in the Davenports' world, about how his relationship with Samantha had gradually shifted from love to strategic alliance. I shared my own struggles after Angela's death, my fear that I was losing my son along with my wife, my determination to honor her wishes by protecting our home. By the time Ryan left, well past midnight, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness, exactly. The wounds were still too fresh for that, but understanding, a foundation upon which we might eventually rebuild. As I watched his taillights disappear down the driveway, I felt Angela's presence more strongly than I had in years. She had known this moment might come, had prepared for it in her own wise way, protecting not just my home, but the possibility of reconciliation. "You were right, my love," I whispered to the night air. As always. The next morning, I woke to a text message from Ryan. "Thank you for last night." For everything. Simple words, but they carried the weight of possibility. I replied with equal simplicity. "Anytime, son, I'm here." 2 days later, Anthony called with news. "Thought you'd want to know. Ryan came to see me yesterday. Asked about restructuring his debt to Charles Davenport. And we worked out a payment plan that doesn't involve selling his soul or his dignity. He also asked about possibly getting involved with that community center project you've been volunteering with. Said something about returning to his roots." A warm feeling spread through my chest. "He did he?" "Don't get too excited," Anthony cautioned. "These things take time. He's got a lot to work through, especially with the Davenports still in the picture." "I know," I agreed. "But it's a start." Over the next few weeks, a tentative new pattern emerged. Ryan would stop by the villa on Sunday evenings, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just for coffee. We kept our conversations light at first, avoiding the still tender subjects of Samantha and the Davenports. Instead, we focused on rebuilding our connection through shared activities, working on small repairs around the villa, planning improvements to the garden, looking through old family photos. One Sunday in late October, Ryan arrived with a truck full of lumber and tools. "What's all this?" I asked, surveying the load. "Remember that treehouse you always promised to build me when I was a kid? The one we designed but never got around to constructing?" I smiled at the memory. "In the old oak behind the garden, of course. I found the plans in Mom's keepsakes," Ryan said, pulling a rolled-up piece of paper from his back pocket. "I thought maybe we could finally build it for future generations." The implication wasn't lost on me. "Future generations, huh?" Ryan shrugged, a hint of his old smile tugging at his lips. "Someday, maybe, if I can fix the mess I've made of my life. One stone at a time," I said, echoing the phrase I'd taught him when we'd built the villa's stone walls together. That's how you build anything worthwhile. We spent that afternoon and many more working on the treehouse, our hands remembering the rhythm of collaboration, our conversation flowing more easily with each passing week. The physical act of building something together seemed to heal parts of our relationship that words alone couldn't reach. It was during one of these building sessions, as November turned the desert landscape golden, that Ryan finally brought up Samantha. "We're separating," he said, his voice steady as he measured a length of wood. "Officially, I mean. I moved out last week." I set down my hammer, giving him my full attention. "I'm sorry, son." He shook his head. "Don't be. It's been coming for a long time. We want different things. Always have, probably." He made his cut, the saw slicing cleanly through the pine. "She's moving back to Phoenix with her parents, starting fresh. And you? What do you want now?" Ryan looked out over the property to the red rocks beyond, his expression contemplative. "To remember who I am, who I was before I got so caught up in the Davenports' world." He turned back to me. "To build something real again, something with meaning." I nodded, understanding. "You always have a home here, Ryan. You know that, right?" "I know, Dad. But I think I need my own space for a while, to figure things out." He smiled slightly. "I'm renting that little adobe house over on Juniper Street. It needs work, but it's something you can shape with your own hands." I finished for him. "I understand." And I did. My son was finding his way back to himself, one decision at a time. It wouldn't be a straight path. There would be complications with the divorce, ongoing tensions with the Davenports, financial challenges to overcome. But he was facing those challenges with a clarity I hadn't seen in him for years. As winter settled over Sedona, bringing cool nights and the occasional dusting of snow on the highest rocks, the treehouse neared completion. It wasn't the grand structure we'd imagined all those years ago, but something simpler, sturdier, a reflection of the new relationship we were building. On the day we finished, adding the small brass plaque Ryan had secretly ordered, Mercer Sanctuary, Esther 2025, I felt Angela's presence so strongly. I almost expected to see her standing beside us, approving our work with her gentle smile. She would have loved this, Ryan said, seeming to sense my thoughts. Yes, I agreed. She always believed in creating spaces for joy. As we stood admiring our handiwork in the fading December light, Ryan turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Open, vulnerable, hopeful. Dad, would you come see my house tomorrow? I could use some advice on the bathroom renovation. Such a simple request, but we both recognized it for what it was, an invitation to be part of his future, not just a relic of his past. I'd be honored, I said. Spring came early to Sedona that year, painting the desert with wildflowers and fresh possibility. The villa garden bloomed under my renewed attention, desert marigolds and penstemon adding splashes of color among the native grasses. Angela would have approved of the transformation, not just of the garden, but of the peace I'd found within myself. Ryan's adobe house on Juniper Street had undergone its own transformation. What had started as a simple bathroom renovation had expanded into a full restoration project. Each weekend, I'd drive over with coffee and donuts, and we'd tackle another room, another challenge, working side by side in comfortable camaraderie. The house was small but solid, built in the 1940s with thick adobe walls that kept it cool in summer and warm in winter. It reminded me in some ways of the first home Angela and I had owned, before Ryan was born, before the villa was even a dream. You've done good. Work here, I told Ryan one Saturday in March as we took a break on his newly finished patio. Really good work? He nodded, surveying his domain with quiet pride. It feels right. Honest. I knew what he meant. The house wasn't fancy or impressive by Davenport standards. No soaring ceilings or imported marble, no views commanding $1 million price tag. But it was solid and true, shaped by Ryan's own hands into something that reflected his rediscovered values. Have you heard from Samantha? I asked carefully. Their divorce had been finalized in February, a surprisingly straightforward process once Ryan had agreed to let go of any claims to the Davenport family investments. Not directly, he replied, but I hear things through mutual friends. She's dating some real estate developer. In Phoenix. Sounds like a better match for her. There was no bitterness in his tone, just the calm acceptance of someone who has moved beyond regret to understanding. And the rest of the Davenports? Ryan smiled wryly. Charles has written me off as a bad investment. Linda sends the occasional text, believe it or not. I think she genuinely cares, in her own way. I remembered Linda's unexpected visit to the villa, her warning about Charles's demands. Perhaps she had more depth than I'd given her credit for. I ran into Charles at the hardware store last week, I admitted. First time since everything. Ryan raised an eyebrow. How did that go? About as you'd expect. He pretended not to see me until we literally collided in the paint aisle. Then it was all stiff politeness and checking his watch. Sounds about right. He did ask about you, though, in that roundabout way of his. Ryan looked surprised. What did he say? Something about hoping you'd found your footing after the unfortunate dissolution of your partnership? I think that was his way of asking if you were okay. And what did you tell him? I smiled, remembering the moment. I told him you were building something new, something that would last. Ryan nodded slowly. I am, in more ways than one. He hesitated, then added, I've been seeing someone for a couple of months now. This was news. Ryan had been focused on his house and his job at the community center since the divorce, showing little interest in dating. Anyone I know? Maybe. Elena Rodriguez? She teaches art at the community center. I smiled, picturing the warm, creative woman I'd met during my volunteer sessions. Good choice. Your mother would approve. She reminds me of Mom sometimes. Not in how she looks, but her spirit. The way she sees beauty in unexpected places. Ryan looked slightly embarrassed by the admission. It's early days, but it feels real. I'm happy for you, son. And I was. Deeply, genuinely happy. To see Ryan finding his way back to the values that had shaped his childhood, before ambition and the Davenport influence had pulled him off course. Later that day, as I drove home to the villa, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed our relationship had instead, through pain and honesty, led to its rebirth. Not as it had been when Ryan was a child, but as something new, a relationship between equals, built on mutual respect and shared understanding. The villa welcomed me as it always did, solid and unchanging in a world of shifting relationships. I walked through the rooms Angela and I had created together, touching familiar surfaces, greeting old memories. But for the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted by the past. It felt alive, with possibility. That evening, I sat on the terrace with a glass of bourbon, watching the sunset paint the red rocks in fiery hues. My phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. Elena loved the treehouse. Says it's perfect for stargazing. Dinner at my place next Sunday? Bringing someone special. I smiled, typing back a simple affirmative. As darkness fell and the stars emerged in the desert sky, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The villa remained my sanctuary, not because of legal clauses or property rights, but because it held the story of a life well lived, a love well tended, a family finding its way back to each other. Angela had known this would happen, had prepared for it in her quiet wisdom, creating the sanctuary clause not just to protect stone and mortar, but to preserve the possibility of reconciliation, to give her husband and son the time and space to remember what truly mattered. I raised my glass to the night sky. You were right, my love, as always. The warm desert breeze seemed to carry her whispered response. The greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the love that builds a home and the truth that preserves it. The next morning, I woke early and drove to Ryan's house, arriving before he'd texted me to come over. I had an idea, a project we could work on together, a symbol of our new beginning. When he opened the door, still in his pajamas and looking confused, I held up a small canvas bag. "What's this?" he asked, stepping back to let me in. I emptied the bag onto his kitchen counter. River stones, smooth, multicolored, each. One unique, tumbled out in a small mountain. "Do you remember these?" I asked. Ryan picked one up, turning it over in his hand. Understanding dawned slowly across his face. From the creek behind Grandma's house in Flagstaff, Mom collected them when she was pregnant with me. I nodded. She painted each one for the entryway of the villa, said they represented our past, present, and future, all flowing together. "I remember," Ryan said softly, "but why bring them here? I thought we could create something similar for your entryway, a connection between your new home and our shared history." Ryan looked at the stones, then at me, his eyes bright with emotion. "I'd like that, Dad." We spent that Sunday designing and building a small rock garden beside Ryan's front door, each stone placed with intention and care. Elena joined us later, her artist's eye adding balance and harmony to our creation. By sunset, the entrance to Ryan's adobe house had been transformed. Still humble, still authentically his, but now connected to a deeper story, a longer river of family history. As we stood admiring our work in the fading light, Ryan's hand resting comfortably on Elena's shoulder, I felt the full circle of our journey. The son who had once tried to take my sanctuary had created his own. The father who had feared losing his only child had instead gained a deeper, truer relationship. The home that had been a battlefield had become, once again, a bridge. "Looks good," I said simply. "It does," Ryan agreed, "but it's still missing something." He disappeared into the house, returning moments later with a small brass plaque similar to the one we'd placed on the treehouse. He knelt and affixed it to the largest stone in the garden. "Mercer Sanctuary," it read. "Esther 2025. Every home should be a sanctuary," Ryan said, standing to face me. "You taught me that, Dad. Not just with words, but with your life." I embraced my son then, wordlessly, the desert evening wrapping around us like a blessing. Over his shoulder, I could see Elena watching with gentle understanding, and beyond her, the red rocks of Sedona standing eternal against the darkening sky. In that moment, I understood what Angela had known all along, that true inheritance isn't measured in property or possessions, but in values that endure, in love that persists through betrayal and forgiveness. In the sanctuary, we create within ourselves and for each other. My son had found his way home, not to the villa where he'd grown up, but to the principles that had built it. And in doing so, he had helped me find my way home too, to a place where the past could be honored without being imprisoned by it, where new beginnings could grow from ancient foundations. As stars began to appear in the desert sky, I remembered the look on Ryan's face that day on my doorstep, when he had banned me from my own home, the shock he'd felt later, when the eviction notice was served to him instead. The humiliation, the anger, the broken trust, all of it necessary, all of it part of the journey that had led us here, to this quiet moment of completion and new beginning. Family survives with respect, I said softly, echoing words I'd thought but never spoken aloud during those dark days. Without it, family is just strangers with the same last name. Ryan nodded, understanding the weight of the statement. I won't forget again, Dad. I promise. And as we turned toward his house, toward the dinner and conversation that awaited us, toward the future stretching unknown but hopeful before us, I believed him. Some lessons must be learned through loss. Some sanctuaries must be threatened before their true value is understood. Some relationships must break before they can be rebuilt, stronger and truer than before. But in the end, what matters is not the breaking, but the building. Not the betrayal, but the return. Not the exile, but the homecoming. In the end, what matters is the sanctuary we create. Stone, nay. By stone, truth by truth, love by love.